Women Month, we're keeping a very close eye on everything as far as rights for women in our country are concerned. Sadly, many rights are often simply ignored, but also every woman has the right to a safe and also satisfying sex life. Now, this includes having the right to say no to her partner or choose whether to use a condom. It's all about consent, isn't it? Women also have the right to a non-violent relationship and a choice in whether to have a baby. But sadly, this is also South Africa, and we know this is not the case for many women around South Africa. Well, Right to Care is calling for a change to that, and let's find out how they're hoping to do this. It's a pleasure to welcome to the show Dr. Seithati Molefi, making time for us this morning, spokesperson for Right to Care. Dr. Molefi, good morning to you. I appreciate your time and the fact that we even are talking about women's rights to say no to sex, to say yes and demand protection during sex in 2023 is still staggering that we even have to talk about this. So good morning to you. How do we change this? Dr. Molefi, sorry, I thought you might still be on mute. I can see you're on mute. Just unmute yourself and let's just pick that up again. There we go. Morning.
Yes,
Morning.
lovely.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, and good morning, and thank you. Yes, it is quite unfortunate that we still have to be discussing these issues, given and with the staggering statistics that we're talking about. Discussing these issues is not really the issue, is the fact that so many women are still negatively impacted by this. And really what needs to be done is that we need to ensure that we actually empower women with accurate information about sexual and reproductive health, and we involve men in women's sexual health and safety, but not just men, but general communities. Because remember, when we empower women and we empower the whole community, it then facilitates an enabling environment that will then make it easy for women to actually enjoy their sexual and reproductive lives, and also to ensure that protection for women and society at large is in place. So we also look at comprehensive health services that need to be in place. These could include HIV testing, family planning, cervical cancer screening, care for mothers either prenatally and postnatally before and after birth, and also mental health support and other psychosocial services. What is also quite critical is that we don't want to just look at clinical aspects or what we call medical aspects of these services, but look as well at, psychosocial needs and what families, schools, the whole environment that women find themselves in, and which impacts their, sexual and reproductive health.
Let's talk about that environment for a second, Dr. Molefi. Let's talk about that environment for a second. A lot of focus, as it should be during Women's Month, is the rights and the responsibility to protect women in society, to fight against GBV, all of that notwithstanding. If we have a very honest and frank discussion about this, the perpetrators in many of these instances, and I mentioned them, it is whether to have a non-violent relationship, whether or not to use a condom. A lot of this falls on the men and the young men in our country. I would contend many young women do know that they should say no to unprotected sex if they don't want it. They do have the right to demand safe sex, for example. But many men in this country, as we know, with the scourge of GBV, don't listen. That's where the education problem is.
Yes. So what we also need to do is to look at why. Why do many men, feel that they have the right to dictate and actually even overpower women when it comes to these issues? So things like the traditional gender roles that are so entrenched in many communities, patriarchal beliefs about ownership or, lording over women, and also stigma about just speaking out. Even speaking about sex or sexual health are stigmatized. It's not just about privacy, it's about secrecy. And, those are problems. And we know that gender-based violence actually disempower women and hinder their access to support or health services. So even when they know that they have the rights, that they can have access, that they can be assisted, but you'll see that they are disempowered and don't find those spaces safe or even accessible to them. And really, this really perpetrates and further creates the problem that we have with continuing HIV infections, as well as unintended pregnancies, which are a problem, particularly for adolescent girls and young women.
Yeah, we've had this discussion in years past as well. I'm glad you talk about teenage pregnancies. Excuse me, Dr. Molefi, I'm still fighting a bit of a cold here. Don't mean to clear my throat in your ear. Teenage pregnancies, I mean, we look at the stats for teenage pregnancies in this country, and I remember we had a number of discussions about the number of underage pregnancies, girls under the age of consent. And I was the one getting, with a few other people, very upset with the terminology we were using. We were saying underage pregnancy. I was calling it statutory rape. If an 11-year-old girl, if a 12-year-old girl, a 13-year-old girl is pregnant, that's statutory rape. She's been raped. She's underage. And that's the kind of issue that we're dealing with. We're still tiptoeing around an issue like that in our country, aren't we?
Unfortunately, staggering and totally heart-wrenching that girls as young as 10 years are actually, number one, sexually, having this sexual intercourse, and definitely not consented. At that age, they can't consent. So they've been raped, as you say, and that, many of them are actually falling pregnant, and it impacts on their health and their future negatively. So these are, the kinds of discussions that we should have, that it does not matter. We cannot victim blame. We cannot apportion any of the blame to the 10-year-old for being in a sexual relationship, for being promiscuous, for being precocious. It's the adult who is at fault. We cannot victim blame. We should do more to protect our young girls. We should do more to educate people. We should do more to deliver consequences to those who actually do then rape these children. And it should be quick, fast, and effective, and seen to be happening, so that people actually understand the whole value chain. They understand the wrong, they understand the consequences. And also the girls also know, because unfortunately they find themselves in situations where they are faced with these unfortunate circumstances. How do they react? Yeah. How do they reach out for help? How do they even maybe, find ways to be, how do I say this? To be safe. Yeah. In groups, in talking to their parents, in ensuring that they have the information that will enable them to even identify when they're at risk, and also to be able to speak about it, whether it is sometimes you can see that you're uncomfortable with the situation. You shouldn't wait until something goes totally wrong before you are able to discuss that situation.
Yeah, you need a safe space to prevent it from happening, not just to deal with it after the fact, but also to prevent it from happening.
And I'm really trying to run away to put the responsibility on the girls.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dr. Molefi, I'm going to ask you just very briefly as I say goodbye, what's your call to action? What do you want people as Right to Care, as I say goodbye to you, what do you want people to do today? What do you want them to do with this information? What do you want to push people into doing to try and change something when it comes to GBV and safe and sexual health and the use of condoms and non-violent relationships in our country? What's your call to action today, very briefly?
Let's have frank discussions. Let's have information out there, appropriate, packaged for our communities, age appropriate, community appropriate, and let's make sure that women have access to this information and to the services that they need to ensure safety and, just enjoyment in terms of their sexual health and their reproductive health rights.
And I appreciate your time. Always doing incredible work is Right to Care. I'm sure you know the name. That's the spokesperson for the organisation Right to Care. Dr. Seithati Molefi making time for us this morning. And I'm sure, as you know, a very, very important discussion. It is still Women's Month. Yes, Women's Day a few days ago. We're going to keep the focus on the rights and responsibilities of caring for some are saying the most vulnerable in society, especially young women in South Africa.